This session, we're going to be looking at Arc. So for this, it's going to be looking at ArcGIS, but specifically, we're going to take a look at ArcOnline. I found that to be kind of the most, at least like in my short soiree into trying to find a trial of it, one of the easiest ones to look at. Okay, so for an overview, it sounds like there is some familiarity with GIS in this group already, but for just a general overview of it, it is Geographic Information System. This is what it stands for, and predominantly, I think Esri kind of owns the space of it, which stands for Environmental Systems Research Institute. Their different products under the ARC umbrella are fairly popular, but there are other GIS softwares out there that don't have like the same price tag that you might find with some of the ARC products. And mostly for like general usage, it's used a lot with creating maps and managing geospatial data that you may have. And this is like a totally shortened list of different industries that might use GIS, but for the environment, public sector, health, and business. My company does like utility services, so that's like another use case. So different kind of services that might be interacting with different communities. And then for the actual product we'll look at, as mentioned before, it's going to be ArcGIS Online. And this is really a web interface for looking at your different geographic data that you may have, and kind of offers some of the same functionality that you might see in the Arc Pro for like the desktop app. You can do a lot of the same functions through this kind of cloud-based service. And for this, it seems like it's pretty decent for different collaboration and being able to manage your data in different groups that you have, but also being able to actually share what you're making with it. And so for this, as like the title kind of suggests, this is pretty much a demo. I don't expect like anybody to have the same exact thing on their screen at the same time, but I did put links in the PowerPoint for this just to source the data that I decided to just pull up for us to look at for a sample with this. And it comes from the US Department of Homeland Security and looks at some mining data for the United States. So for this, there are different trials that you can do with ArcOnline. The one that I've been using is through the student account for it. So it might, the things that I'm going to go through might look a little bit different if you do a trial with it, and if you're going through, there's like a professional trial that you can do as well. But that offers, I think you have to fill out like your workplace information and things like that for it. So I just decided to do the student one. But for this interface that we're looking at right here, this is like the main landing page for it. And I'm just going to kind of give a tour of some of the different functions in this, but I've got the chat up, and then also for you guys, feel free to like unmute if you have any questions or want to look at something else like as I'm going through what's here. So the data set, I'm going to pull that up because that's what we're going to be looking at. I actually found this to begin with on ArcGIS. They have a like subsect of their website. That's the ArcGIS hub. I know for some of the other organizations, at least in the Syracuse area, I think with like the city of Syracuse, who spoke a couple weeks ago for us, like they host some of their data on the ArcGIS hub, but you can go here to find different data sets. I personally like didn't have a shapefile out of the box to just use for this, so I did a little research to see kind of what might be good to use for it. But there's different data sets here if you want a shapefile, but then also for different data, if you do have data that has a geographic component, if it's addresses that you can geocode to get the latitude and longitude before loading up into ArcGIS, that would work as well. But I chose to use this shapefile that I've got pulled up right now. And we'll take a look at this in just a second, but it's essentially different mining resources in the United States. So it's kind of a breadth of different areas that are either have a mining operation or are targeted for a specific mineral resource. And the data set itself, like from this, it's about 3,000 records, so it wasn't anything too big that seemed like it was gonna like crash my computer when using it. So for this, the first thing that I did to pull up was to look at it on map view, and you can do that like a couple different ways. On this website from the like Homeland Security Department, they have a actual like link on it to open it in ArcGIS, because this website that we're looking at that they are using is through Arc as well. So we could just click here to open the data set itself. But also, like I mentioned, there's like a couple different ways you can load in data. So if you want to download the shapefile and then bring it in, you can do that as well. So I'm going to go to, this is like the main landing page. If I go to content, that's going to show the different data that's there that we can work with. And for this, it was one of, I think, let me see, because I've done some manipulation in this. It doesn't have like the straight like shapefile that we're looking at, but content is where you can find like different layers that you're working with. So I'm going to go to the map. We'll open up I think, oh, sorry, go to the maps, grab it from there. And then I'm going to hit open in map viewer because that's what's hosted like on ArcOnline. Oh, and then the other thing with this, so from like content, you can go in and depending on what you're working with, you can be like super detailed with the documentation for what you're using, like if it's for your organization or something like that. And, you know, you have other people that'll be using the same data. I think having that like documentation piece of it is really helpful. And the way they have it set up is pretty intuitive. Like they just have these edit little buttons around for different areas where you can like tag it or give more data to what's going on. We're going to open this up. And then just before I get too far into it, I just want to point out for the map viewer, they have two different parts of it. There's Map Viewer Classic, and then there's the Map Viewer New version, which is like the one that we're looking at right now. So I might switch back and forth depending on what we're looking at. But the one that I've got up right now seems to have, like as the name implies, some more like recent functionality of it. But they do seem to have kind of like cross functionality of, you know, people that might be flipping back and forth in between them. So there are, we might see some of these as well, like warnings for what's going on with that. So I'm going to look at the shapefile that I loaded in originally. It'll come up in your layers tab. And so if we click this, it'll give us a little more information about what's going on with it. So we can see it's a feature layer. And then you can really get like into the weeds of customizing like any of the things that you have up for this. For this kind of base layer, I just have them up as just plain black dots throughout the entirety of the United States, just because I figured didn't want it to be too busy, since that was like the preliminary like look at what was going on. I'm gonna close that. But then I'm gonna switch over just for right now back to the Map Viewer Classic to show some of the ways that you can create different data from what you have in this like initial shapefile. So this tells us that I have a configuration that's not supported, so we'll see that in the other map view. We'll just click that right now. So we've got that shapefile up, and thing with this is that I hadn't looked at the data before. I know on the desktop app for ArcGIS, it's pretty common to just like open the attribute table and kind of like go for it and see like what is going on with it. But that can be kind of troublesome if you have like a ton of attributes with that. So what we can do is you can preview from here, but for this, I am not experienced in mining data, so I did not know what some of the like symbols and different abbreviations were in this. So I kind of just went off of some of the components that I can make out for doing some of the like queries that we're gonna look at. But for what's here, you can like scroll through the data with the bars, but then also if you are trying to look at certain records, you can do like a highlight and like show selected records. And then also some different things if you want to sort for what's here, you can do that as well. I'm trying to think, I might, I want to open up, I'm gonna open up another tab and then bring it over to get the content for you guys, because that has a good example of what like you can view the data as in a different way. Bring this back over here. So this is the same thing. I just didn't want to lose the map. So if I go to content, we're going to go back to another layer that was in that. So for the specific shapefile, I'm not actually like sure how to get it to come up for like the specifics of it, but I did a couple different modifications that I'll show in a second. But one of them was just resource density. So we'll click on that one. And this can show just for like kind of a preview of what the data itself has for the different attributes. Oh, shoot. Actually, this isn't a good one because this one did a calculation. So I'm going to pick a different one. We'll do this Texas one. This one, I just done a selection of like, what are the resources in Texas for this data set. But this would grab like the same attributes that we would see otherwise. So this has the different fields that are there. This is shown in a table similar to what we were just like looking at from the map viewer itself. But if we go to fields, then we can see this has, at least like for me, this is a little like easier to look at to try and see what all of our different field types are. So some of them that we can make out without having any prior like experience with this data. So like city, state, county, things like that are kind of easy to understand. And it also gives us the data type, which depending on like the data set that you're working with, that might be important for like how you're looking at things. But one of the types that's in here, let me find it. There is the description for the mining resource itself. So if we click on that, we can see a little more details about it. And this shows us kind of for some of the, different attributes for like visibility of it. Is it editable? Like what's going on with it? So we could like edit the permissions of that if we maybe were sharing this with somebody else and didn't want like the data integrity to be odd from that. But what we can do is we can look at some of the unique values from what's going on in the data. So if we, this displayed value, and then if you just like leave this part blank and then hit generate list, that'll give a list of the different values we have from that. So we can see from this like some of the strings that are in here might be good things to search on for the data. Like if we want to pull up, like for example, all of the coal mines or something that had a combination of some of these different resources. So for what I'm going to show, I was kind of basing this off of what I was grabbing out of here for some things that I could make out for it for what some of the resources were. So I'm going to close this and cancel because we don't really need to save that list. But if we go back to the map view, so we have this data, and what I kind of wanted to pull up was, okay, if we're looking at different like types of mines or mining resources, like how would we pull them up? So what you can do is go to analysis in the map viewer, and there's all of these different functions in here that you can use with your data. This one specifically for what was given, it didn't seem like there was a heavy like mathematical component to it. It didn't seem like there was something like associated in the data that's here like for this example that was going to benefit from running different like statistical tests on it because it did seem like it was pretty like categorical versus quantitative, which you might find in other data sets. But for this, you can go through each of these different categories and they have pretty like well explained little pop-ups for them for what each thing is going to do to give you a new layer or a new like feature layer for the map you're working on. So for this, I'll show in a second the ones that I like work with to get the layers that are there, but just as some examples for it, you can join different features that you have if you are combining from different data sets, if they're like not already in the same shapefile. And then getting some of, as mentioned, like summary statistics for what's there. For this, because it's really categorical, I think it would be kind of more of a count situation unless you were getting into like the nitty gritty of different distances for what's going on there. Find locations. So this is what I was using primarily for getting some of these new layers. So you can use this kind of as a search if you're trying to look at, hey, like what's already in my data. You can use the existing locations to get that. Centroids, maybe not for this data set, but sometimes that's good to get to find like within a specific cluster of data, like what the center point might be for different kind of base calculations. But for derived new locations, this can give you data from an expression that you're entering. So if you do that, what's going to pop up is something similar to like a query builder that you're looking at. And what I did for these was go to the mines and mineral resources that's there. And then I put for this part where, and for this, I just did like the where attribute because I'm essentially doing like a contains query on it. But you could also do, if you had different data sets, something that I happen to do like a lot in GIS is to do intersections within a certain amount of distance of each other for different data sets that I'm working with. But for this, we're going to go to that same one that I previewed earlier with the description, and then we'll put in for this, I'm going to change that to contains because I can't, oops, sorry. So I'm not exactly sure what the full length of that was, and there could be like different types that had this in it, but if we hit add, and then it's a name here. Oh, and then the other thing with this that I noticed, depending on what your view is, so the data set itself also has like Alaska and Hawaii in it, and then some of, I don't know if the other ones were in maybe Puerto Rico, but there is a little checkbox that's kind of sneaky that says use current map extent. So I've been unchecking that just in case there are things outside of our current view that we might want to look at. So then if you run that, and normally, I can't remember how long it takes. Hopefully it's quick, but for this kind of small data set, it didn't seem to take too long when I was looking at it before. But that, once it pops up, will give us another like layer of data that we can look at with the other ones that are here. But that's essentially, there's two different ones over here. One of them's gold, where I just did that same kind of contain search, used gold as the input for it. And then same thing with gemstones. I think I just did a search with gem like in that. But we can look at one of these other layers. So if we, and again, this is in the like classic map viewer, so it's a little bit different on the newer one, where you're going to find what these same functions are in the sidebar. But what we can do is really customize like the style of what we're looking at. So by default, it's going to give you just points for what you're looking at, but depending on your data, you could decide, hey, like I want a heat map that's going to show kind of what I'm looking at a little bit differently and might help you discover like some new parts about your data. But if you hit options from here, this is where you can go into symbols, and it gives you like all kinds of different categories. So depending on if you're using it for work or if you're just using it for fun, like you can really get into like, I don't know, just to pull it up and look at the National Park Service one. So like something like this, if you're like making a map for use for like visitors or something like that, this would be really helpful than having everything is just kind of the same point on a map and then not being super helpful for what the intended use is. And then kind of basics of like fill and then outline if it's a basic shape like this. And then also just like symbol size, things like that that you can tweak and kind of get a feel for what your use case really is. I'm gonna hit OK just to close that. We'll hit done. Okay, that's still running, so it's probably good that we looked at those other ones because I don't know when that's gonna finish. But so we'll go back to analysis and look at, I think, yeah, that was pretty much everything from find locations. Data enrichment I did not use, so that's, just see what that is. Information about people, places, and businesses. Oh, that's another thing I want to note. With the trial, I'm not sure how this works for when there's already a subscription to Arc, but you have an allotted amount of credits that can be used for what you're looking at. I can't remember if this is something that we'll see in the drop down, but I know one of the like analysis options involved using data that Esri had on population to like create calculations from like what you had. So I didn't know it. I think it was something to the effect of like density for like per whatever your data points were divided by like the local population, kind of what maybe per person like that like resource might allot to. And then for this, there's other things that, once again, with the data that's there, it depends on like the type of data that you're looking at. But if you're trying to find hotspots for like what's going on, like we can see for this, like along the Appalachian Mountains, there's a lot of like mining resources there just from like offhand, like looking at the map, but there could be like other areas that just visually might pop out if you were running something like that to look at your data. And then for proximity, this is another interesting thing, maybe not with this data set, but if there is something that was like a different use case for, you know, maybe public resources for like, I don't know, where to put a new grocery store or something like that for like the drive time areas, which is interesting to kind of see like given where those are plotted on a map to create another data point that you're looking at of different drive times, maybe from like a suburban area or something like that. And then for managed data, this is kind of another area of some of like what I think of for like basics of kind of looking at Arc. So merging layers and overlaying them to kind of look at maybe once you've generated something, you want to combine it with something that's related that it would like go with a little bit better. We'll go back to, okay, that's still running. I might X that out if it's like being particularly annoying, but for once you have layers in here, so what you can do is you can take them and okay, let me grab the right part, but you can, maybe I have to have it highlighted. Okay, ideally you can take these and drag them, but for some reason I can't do it right now. I don't know if it's because that's running, but you can like reorganize what's going on there. And then the other thing too, like you could see like when I had this pulled up, so some of the layers that I made I didn't have visible. One of the things that I did was bring in another data set just to kind of get an idea of what the plotted points for all these resources look like. And I'm gonna load this up. It's kind of a mess, but I think it's just kind of an example of something that you can do with the data that you're looking at. So this, because it's mining data, this is like different like geological periods from like the history of the, I don't know if it's, I think it might be the Earth data, but for like what you're looking at, so this could be something that might be helpful for a different like use case that you have. Let me see. Oh, and then that's the other thing as well, like you can pull up, so this will show us like the different different geologic periods from it. So this is essentially like a key of what the data has. I think I can see an example of it. If I hit on this gold one, oh, that one's not good. There was one of them, I might have removed this layer, but I remember I had pulled up something to try and create different colors based on the state, but there is like a limit that I'm not sure if you can adjust it for, like after so many points, like I think Arc just kind of taps out for what it's gonna like auto generate for you for colors for something. So that's where I think you can kind of play around with what's more helpful to have as a layer itself, or something that's more helpful just to customize in the keys that you have. Like if you had like a heat map or something like that to have the points. And then I'm going to turn on like another layer that I had made from that analysis tab of looking at what the density was of the different mines that were in this data set. So we can see like kind of a concentration on the East Coast for what's here. And then another thing, so with a smaller data set, it seemed a little bit too hectic to use the entirety of the United States for it, but I used this Texas resources layer that I'd made, which was just grabbing what had a state equal to Texas for the resources, and then creating this one, if you keep the like auto-generated naming from the analysis, so what I have here is pretty much just what it spit out. This will tell you kind of like what was run for it. So it was using the aggregation from the analysis, and then creating hexagonal bins from the data that it spit out. And that's like another one where you can kind of tweak it how you want to. I know if you don't want hexagons, I think you can get them in like squares on a map instead. It's really like personal preference with it. And then once again, something like this, you can go into the different colorations of the concentration of what's there. So for this one, for example, like the darker kind of teal colors are where there's more clusters that we can see. Okay, so I'm gonna, okay, yeah, we'll just X that out. I think it doesn't give us any prompts because it never actually ran. But then for this, you can also, so if you're like generating this for like public use or for whatever you have, you can get into the legend for it, kind of like looking at all the different data points that you have, maybe like renaming what's there. And then there's other features in this that are like common from the like desktop perspective as well. So different things like the measurement tool to try and see, doing a selection between different points, you can set like what your like parameters are for what like distance you're going to use for it. And then that might be helpful for whatever you're looking at. But I think I'm going to switch back to, at this point, unless anyone has any questions, I'm going to switch back to the new map viewer to kind of show some of the different charts and things that we can generate on that front.
Hey, Ashley, I do have a question.
Yeah.
When you said that you can like triangulate to generate new data points,
Mm-hmm.
when you said, oh, there is an unassisted area there that doesn't have, for example, EV charging station, and
Yeah.
I can identify where in the shapefile table, is it going to be marked as new point or new data source or not?
I think so. I think what would happen for that. So if you're working out of this analysis tab, it's gonna give you like another separate like layer that it's generating. So for something like that, because it is distance, I'm not sure if it would come out as, it might be like line data that has a distance to it instead of looking like a point to us, but that would come out as something separate instead of like on top of that. I don't think it would manipulate that like original data that you have, if that makes sense. Like it would come out as its own thing.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And that's something like I didn't play around with it because I wasn't sure of like what other like input I might want to use to like draw data from that. But I think, yeah, that would be something that would be really cool to look at. Okay, so we'll go back to the new map viewer. I'm just gonna proceed without saving because I didn't really change anything that I was looking at before. So for this, I'm gonna pull up the same kind of thing. And for kind of what I was interested with this, something that I hadn't worked with before that I was like excited to kind of take a look at, for the different layers that we have. If we go over here to the charts tab. So I have one that I made so far, and we can like look at how to do it in just a second, but you can have kind of an aggregate of the different like outputs that you want to produce that go alongside your map. I know for thinking of Arc, it's like, oh, it's just the map I'm gonna get. But then for this, you can kind of make your own visualizations from the data that's there and kind of work with it. So it's not it's not a super complicated chart, but I thought just for something to start, I wanted to pull up from the like gem like resource layer that I had already to see, okay, like you can kind of make out on the map like what state these are in, but I just wanted to throw them on like a bar chart to see what the state counts might be. So for this, you can make something like this to say, like, okay, this is like my count data for this specific attribute in a bar chart. And then get into some of the customizations of this. I really only changed like the title on it and some of the capitalization for like the state, for example, came in all caps in the original data. But for something like this, you can edit it, make it super pretty, and then also have something like this where you can like share on whatever like platform that you would want that's related to the data itself. So if we go try and what's over here, well, I'm gonna go through these. I think so. The charts, I think we have to do from a layer itself, but just to see like what else is here. These are kind of some of the same like functions, like I said, that we were seeing in Classic, but it just looks a little bit different because it's housed in this area instead. You can also do something like this if we want to like apply a filter once the layer is there, so it's not something necessarily like set in stone. Clustering. We'll see if that does. Okay, yeah, so like that's kind of cool. It's the same like data that we were just looking at on the chart, but has something on the map instead. And I think you oh, sorry, I clicked on something, so it pulled up the exact data. There's another part of this. Oh, here it is. Sorry, it was the next one. For configure pop-up. So this is something that's kind of useful for what the data is depending on what you have. So if somebody is interacting with your data for the first time, you've got this like gorgeous map that goes with it. But if you want to see like what is going on at the different data points, then these pop-ups can be super helpful for that. You can choose like what fields you want to show to go with them. Maybe have like aliases of what some of the maybe more complex like symbols and things are, to like turn them into something that might be easier to understand for someone just interacting with your data for the first time. But I think that's something that's pretty like cool about working with kind of like these interactive like maps that you can use for your data. So the fields, this is kind of pulling up some of the same data that we had before that we were looking at from like that attribute table, and then also from that content tab if we want to work with the fields from here. And then I think, okay, that just had labels. I haven't really gotten super far into sketching. I know from like the desktop app, sometimes having like the ability to just kind of draw around your points and then figure out what's going on is nice. But I think we'll do, sorry, I'm gonna turn that off because now I don't necessarily need it. But from I think, okay, I can't actually, I think because I don't have that one up, we can't work with it, but you are able to like create from the given layers the different charts from over here. If we want to do like add chart, and then you can pick from there like what type you want to work with, and then I'll just pull this up just to show an example of it. But you can pick from your data, so what specific part of it you want to work with, and then what you actually want to look at. Since this is categorical, I just did the count for the one because it was easier just to show what was there, but you can do some of the customization here and then have like your output from it. So I'm gonna close out of that. But so then once you have like what you're working with, you can save it, and then similar to like how I opened this up to begin with, you can keep working with the data projects that you have, and then kind of get as like detailed or not detailed as you want with them. And then that's all kind of housed under, let me pull up your like content at the end of the day, so you can go from there for like working with your projects again. And even I think not 100% for the for the charts output, like where that's actually housed, but I know that there's like a way of sharing kind of from there. But I think, so I mentioned it earlier for different like people that have like organizations. So if you want to have like, okay, I have a team of people, I want to have all these like data projects like housed under this one area. So that's where something like that would be helpful. And then aside from the map, I'm trying to think for these different tabs that are here, groups is kind of the same deal if like whoever you're sharing your data with. And then I think the other thing too, you can go into the settings if you want, like, hey, I just want this to be my private data until it's something published and want others to work with it. And then another thing that I didn't dive like super far into, but I just want to touch on, there are different, what are the sample notebooks? I think, try this one. So this has kind of similar to some of the different like interactive kind of like coding interfaces that you might see. So this reminded me of like like a Jupyter notebook for Markdown for like what it's in. But you can have something like this that goes with your data project where you can show like what you're working with, and for like the different, I think I'm pretty sure that this is in okay, yeah, it is in Python. But you can work with Arc from there and communicate with it, and then have like your output from it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like I'm only generating a map because I'm working with GIS. This is like, I can access the data that's in there, I can get what I want from it, and then kind of work with it in this coding environment. But what people do is set up these notebooks, and then you can have that as a way of showing, like, this example is kind of a documentation type example for what it's doing, but you can have something like this that shows, like, these are the steps that we have to run to get the output that you want from the data that's there. I think I'll leave that because we're not actually doing anything with it. I think that mostly covers what's there. I'm gonna pop back to the PowerPoint real quick. So what I listed in here, and again, the PowerPoint for this will be on our GitHub, but the main Esri website, kind of the jumping off point for the different products. And then Esri is really good about having a ton of different learning resources for what's there. So there's a link to that as well. And then the ArcGIS Hub, which we took a look at earlier. And then I think that's what all these were. So you can see kind of base for everything that's there. And then this was for like the learn ArcGIS portion to try and figure out, like, okay, if you're like getting into it maybe the first time or trying to beef up on different content with it, to see like maybe what different things you might want to be learning about with it. But and it seemed like from what I've seen so far that there's like a good combination of just straight articles, like if you want to pull something up, or kind of video tutorials for what you're working with. And like as mentioned, for at least like the functionality of the different features in here, there's like the different help tabs for it, but then also kind of descriptions like we saw with the analysis of what each thing is going to do. So I think that's pretty much all I had, but does anyone have any questions or like want to take a look at anything in here while I've got it up?
Hi, Ashley, me again.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of ways to extract data, export data from ArcGIS to a system that is more dynamic? For example, I work with street lighting, and when we include a new device on the asset management basics, but there's some components of the smart street lighting that we can generate data from.
Mhm.
And my question is, the output of the data generated ArcGIS, is it easy to include in a new or to merge with a new system that it is inputting data real time?
Yeah, so I think from what I've seen, I don't have like personal experience with it, and you can, if I'm like not answering this correctly, just definitely stop me. But if it's something I know from like the APIs that are out there for Arc, like if you had something hosted from it that was communicating with like data that you were updating, and it's grabbing that same data, like if you had that maybe on like a website or something, you could have that like update like in quote unquote like real time with as like your data was getting updated. But for actually like exporting what's here, so like for the examples that we looked at so far, so you can export like for the main one that we're looking at, like if I wanted to take the whole thing and export it as a shapefile, like I could do that, but because you might not necessarily be able to work with a shapefile and everything, I know there is still from like the like data tables that you're generating, you can export those as like a CSV to use for like different like use cases, for if you were looking at like, hey, I made this calculation of like this is about like what distance it is to, I don't know, from like the street light to something else. And maybe you want to use that for like predictive modeling for these points that you don't have. So that's something that you can like export from here. I'm not 100% sure like where like what the right buttons to click to get to that point would be, but I know that like that's one of kind of the core uh like benefits of like what you're making in here is like a lot of it you can export in some form to something else.
Thank you. That helps a lot.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything else?
maybe my question is like, what would the advantage of using ArcGIS over a like more multi-purpose um, visualization software like Tableau or another thing that has mapping integrated? So I guess I don't I'm not sure what um, the big strengths are. Is it just that there are more like options for like those points and things and other and kind of spatial calculations? Is that what the real like?
Yeah, I think that's like the strength that they kind of like rely on for this. I'm not like personally like super familiar with like Tableau's like mapping features in it. I know like for this, for example, like I wouldn't think like, oh, I need to make a chart. I'm gonna go to Arc to do that. Like that's I don't know, intuitively like not something I would like associate to begin with, but I think kind of the like backbone of like other resources that they have from this. And I guess the other kind of nice thing from this, so from like the like ArcGIS hub for this, it's not you don't necessarily have to be like a member or have like a ArcGIS um like subscription to get a lot of the data on there. Like some of that is still really open, but I think kind of just that integration of, hey, we have this huge pool of resources of people maybe looking at similar data or other data that can help that you can kind of quickly pull in like as you're building like out like the data that you have that you're looking at. I think that's kind of their main draw, but that's also like my opinion. I'm not like 100% on that.
If you allow me, actually, sorry, I I am not a programmer. I don't code.
Mhm.
So for us, that I am an urban planner and architect. So for us, that we don't know how to use Python or Power BI, let's say, very much. These are very intuitive, I would say. And I have been not so exposed to ArcGIS as I would like, but after this presentation, I'm definitely gonna get some hours on that. But I think from the perspective of government and people who are not from the programming world, from the developer world, I think that works for us.
Mhm. Yeah, it does seem like at least for the features of it, it does seem like like there's definitely a lot to it, but then also yeah, that like intuitiveness that like goes with it of still being able to like get something up and running, like exactly how you would want to tweak it for your data. If like I know for example, even with like the coloring of it, like instead of putting in your like HTML color codes, you can just use kind of the like color wheel picker like from it itself is probably going to be a lot faster for trying to get those outputs that you would want.
If I can just chime in on that, I mean, as someone who uses Tableau a lot, I don't know a lot about ArcGIS, but what I've seen here strengthens my feeling. And I mean, I've done some, cursory research online before, right? Like basically reading what someone said in core. So it's not
Yeah.
incredibly deep, but that really ArcGIS, if you want to do very, very complex mapping and geospatial stuff, then ArcGIS is the way to go. But Tableau, is more, it definitely has a lot of, pros in terms of being able to easily do certain things. But having, created like lessons a lot, in data group on Tableau, sometimes it can be, it's not always clear whether you can do certain things that you want to do, like, you have to sometimes find a workaround or I wonder if I can make this a square instead of a circle. Those things seem very simple to do in ArcGIS, and you seem to have a lot of options at your fingertips. Whereas in Tableau, it works really well, but it's not always necessarily as robust. You don't have. I think there's a trade-off, right? Like you have maybe slightly less robust options, but with that, the options you have like work really well. So I think it's about the complexity of the mapping, honestly. Just my 2 cents, but this is really interesting. I appreciate it. I'm gonna go and try to figure out if I can do some of these things in Tableau.
Yeah, no, that would be awesome. I mean, I think like the whole point of like this like demo series that Amanda and I are doing is kind of to show like we're not supported by any of these softwares. We're just like trying to show like this is kind of what it looks like once you're in it, and kind of some of the usages that you might get out of it. But definitely like, yeah, there's not just one kind of like silver bullet tool out there. And it definitely seems like obviously the mapping side of it is super heavy in this, but obviously like if there's like that functionality in Tableau that's still gonna meet the need of the different usages that people have, then that's a good thing to be using as well. But
I'm very jealous of the mapping options. It's really really nice.
yeah, I think at least with this, it was cool for me because I kind of go into Arc every day. I do the same kind of thing of saying like, okay, I need to find like these within this distance, and I don't know, I hadn't like looked at this kind of stuff before, so it was so yeah, there's definitely like a lot of different options to it that are out there. I think that unless anyone has anything else, it is 8 o'clock, so we can get wrapped up. But thank you for joining. And like I mentioned before, we're not like supported by Esri or anything like that, but there are like on the GitHub like PowerPoint, and if you just look it up, I think it's a 21-day trial for like Arc if you choose to do it for like the free trial period. At least that's what like I'm signed up for right now. But yeah, it's something out there that is different for mapping if you choose to use it. But yeah, we just kind of wanted to show it. So thanks for joining.
Thank you. This was great.
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no problem.
Have a good one.
Thanks, you too.